going to hand it over to Janelle, who is our first speaker.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you for inviting me onto this platform, actually. I think this is a great thing. Somebody said this is awesome. I totally agree. So thanks for setting this up. It's very timely and, you know, very appropriate and great that we are starting to explore some real conversations. Good evening, everybody. For those of you that have joined us, my name is Janelle Raeburn. I am not only a school friend of Angela's, and that's how we know each other, but I would describe myself as a culturepreneur. I'm also a project manager. I've managed a number of projects around the world. I can hear somebody, so there's some feedback. So I think just to reiterate what Angela said, if everybody who's participating, if you can mute unless you're speaking, that would be great. Thank you. So, as I said, I'm a culturepreneur. I'm a project manager and manage a number of projects around the globe. I'm currently managing a project on behalf of the City Council. Jonathan, thank you, Jonathan, for muting. And I also have my own chat show, online chat show, and I do some speaking, etc. So what I'll be talking about is dissecting structural and systemic racism within the workplace. And I guess the place to start from, and forgive me, I'm going to be looking at some notes because, as Angela said, this was quite short notice, so I've literally kind of thrown this together within the last 24 hours. But I guess where I want to start from is, what is racism? You know, racism seems to have become this really kind of dirty word for a lot of people, and you know, some people are offended if they hear the word racism, but what actually is it? Well, racism is actually started off as a political ideology. So it started off as something that, just like communism, socialism, capitalism, something that was created, in fact, to justify slavery. So the whole premise of racism is that, sorry, somebody, I'm getting some feedback again. If you can please be on mute unless you're speaking. Thank you very much. The whole premise of racism was to justify, as I said, the transatlantic slave trade. And what did that look like? Well, in order to justify the brutal and inhumane treatment of Africans, this ideology was created. And you know, what it actually said, or what it actually perpetuated, was the idea that people of African descent, Black people, were subhuman, and therefore that treatment of them was justified. Just like you would treat cattle, you can brand cattle, you can slaughter cattle. You know, if you feel that you have, you know, some of your livestock that maybe isn't kind of the best, in terms of its health or whatever, then you can slaughter it, you can get rid of it. And so that's where racism came from. And it was the idea that the Europeans were superior to the African race. So race in itself, there is the human race, and race in itself is actually something that's been socially constructed. Now, if we fast forward to where we are today, what is structural and systemic racism? Well, I would describe it as a really bad hangover, a terrible hangover that has lasted 200 years, almost 200 years post the slave trade. And it's never really been dismantled. So what's happened is that racism has shapeshifted and has evolved and has weaved its way into every kind of aspect of life. And that's what the word structural kind of means. So whether it be in the workplace, whether it be in social settings, whether it be within healthcare, whether it be within education, the criminal justice system, racism has managed to weave itself into all these aspects. So yes, the old forms of racism pretty much you know, understood, unacceptable by and large. You know, you won't go into work and somebody will call you the N-word or a derogatory term. That's not going to happen. And for many, they believe that because that doesn't happen, racism has been miraculously solved. But it hasn't. As I said, it's evolved and it's shapeshifted, and it's become woven into these structures and is now very subtle, it's insidious, it's very hard to often articulate when somebody is subjected to systemic racism within the workplace. But it's very real, it's very apparent, and it does a lot of damage, particularly around mental health for employees. Equally, you know, there's been a lot of work done in the last however many decades around equality, but from my own personal opinion and research and just personal experiences, the whole premise of equality and the way it's applied is also outdated. The kind of general premise of equality is that, you know, we need to treat everybody the same. And that is wrong. And the reason I say that is wrong is because we are not all the same. We are all from different backgrounds, we have different struggles, we have different needs, we have different socioeconomic factors that affect us. And so where we should be directing efforts in terms of equality and fairness is actually to recognize that and to understand that we are all different, and therefore, in order to ensure that there is fairness, those differences need to be taken into account, and those needs need to be taken into account. I know that's a fine balance, a very fine balance to get right, but it's not impossible, and organizations really need to focus on how they can get that balance right in terms of being fair, implementing policies that promote equality, but understanding that everybody's different. One of the things that has happened over the years is the term BAME has become really popular. And in actual fact, what that does is it dilutes, so Black and minority ethnic for those who, Black, Asian and minority ethnic for those who maybe aren't familiar with the term. I imagine most people are. Again, with the work that I've done and the research that I've done, and just my own personal experiences, that dilutes each individual within that term's needs. So the struggle of a Black person is different to the struggle of an Asian person, is different to the struggle of someone from Eastern Europe, is different to somebody from another ethnic background. And I think because that term has become so acceptable and so widely used, the policies and procedures and structures that are in place don't really get down to the nitty-gritty to really address what's going on. So, of course, you know, this has kind of been sparked off in the wake of what's happened. You know, George Floyd was tragically murdered in front of our very eyes, and this has started a real chain of events that is opening up some honest, real, meaningful conversations for us to move towards making a change. Now, back to what structural racism looks like in the workplace. As I said, it's very hard to call out. Often within a lot of corporate structures, you'll find that the lower kind of levels of the hierarchy are mostly people of Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and the further up an organization you go, the less diverse it becomes. And that in itself is a problem and creates issues, because and I'll speak from a Black perspective in particular, more than likely, you will be reporting to a white manager. So if you are experiencing issues of structural racism and terms, I'll start to go into what the terms are. You've experienced, maybe you've been a victim of unconscious bias or unconscious bias. Sorry,
Janelle, I'm muting everyone. I'm going to mute everyone, including you, and if you just unmute yourself.
The protesters took their own legal.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Where was I? So just in terms of what structural racism looks like within the workplace, as I said, most of the time at the lower levels of an organization, you'll find the most diversity. And as you go up higher into the organization, into senior leadership positions, that diversity disappears. And most of the time, it's usually white, often male, people who are making decisions and creating policies that affect and feed into how staff are treated within an organisation. So that in itself is a problem, because what happens is the view of the average Black person, maybe working on the front line, is not necessarily understood. The experiences is not necessarily understood by that white male at the top. And so whatever policies are devised will never be able to take into account what those real and lived experiences are. As I said, racism has shapeshifted. In particular, it's now structural. I mean, there's some research that's been done, and there are 4 by a lady called Shelley Tokluk, and there are 4 types of racism that she describes. Internalized racism, which lies within individuals, beliefs about biases, about race and color, and it's influenced by culture. And it may be unconscious or psychologically rooted and often reflects history, intergenerational trauma. Interpersonal racism occurs between individuals, and it's anecdotal, and it's biases that occur when individuals interact with others, and their private racial beliefs affect their public interactions. Institutional racism, which we've heard a lot about, most of you will know about Stephen Lawrence. That term was coined post Stephen Lawrence's murder, and the work tirelessly that Baroness Doreen Lawrence has done has led to this term now being, and the review that was done into it has led to this term being pretty much understood and accepted. But institutional racism occurs within institutions and systems of power. Unfair policies, discriminatory practices, schools, workplaces, etc., that routinely produce racial inequitable outcomes for people of colour and advantages for white people. And then the last is structural racism, racial bias amongst institutions and society, cumulative and compounding effects of an array of societal factors, including the history, culture, ideology, and interactions of institutions and policies. Now, back to how that feeds into the workplace. I think there's aspects of all of that that feed into the workplace, but one of the things that many people have experienced, Black people, other people of colour, but in particular Black people have experienced, is subconscious or unconscious bias or implicit bias and microaggressions that have come from that implicit and subconscious bias, unconscious bias. So what does that mean? I'll give some real examples. I did a talk yesterday. I presented to Islington's Equality Forum, and I was asked to give some real examples of that. So for example, a good friend of mine, her granddaughter has just come out of university. She got a first at university. She's gone into a corporate organization, very enthusiastic, full of the vigor of life and full of ambition, bright-eyed. And she has come up against some unconscious bias. And she actually spoke to me about it. What happened to her? Well, she's not a smoker. And there's quite a few of her white colleagues who are smokers, and they are able to have unlimited smoke breaks. There's no time limit on it. They're able to have unlimited smoke breaks. She was 1 minute late for work, and her manager came down on her like a ton of bricks. It was an absolute shock to her. It rocked her to her core. She couldn't understand why. She felt so unfairly treated, but it was something that was real and experienced by her. What else? I'll give a real example for myself. So a project that I manage on behalf of Islington Council was covered by BBC One. The One show came and did a little piece on it, and myself as the project manager did that piece. When I went into work the next day, quite a few of my white colleagues said to me, "Oh my God, you came across so well in that." It wasn't, "Oh, Janelle, you did fantastically well. That was so good." It was more of a shock. Again, that is an implicit bias. It implies that because of my skin color, I can't articulate. The assumption is I wouldn't do very well within that environment. And so the comments that came back weren't congratulatory. They were more quite surprised and shocked. Those are just a couple of examples.
So much, Janelle. Can Freida? I'm muting myself.
Here. Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Freida. I work at Portsmouth City Council as a community coordinator. As I said to Angela, I've been talking, well, a lot in the last few days, particularly from a professional perspective, but I was reflecting about today, and I really thought that I just wanted to speak from a personal perspective. I also had half a mind to email Angela and say that I was just tired, mentally, physically, emotionally, too tired to take part today, and also just been angry quite a lot. So I thought, oh, just don't want to do this. But I realized I'm not the only person feeling this way, and that a lot of the reason why I feel the way I do is in relation to the topic we're talking about today. So I thought I'd just come and offload on all of you, and that maybe that would be therapeutic for me. So I'll give you a few examples of the things that have contributed to my exhaustion this week, and anger perhaps. So I've had seen a black person being interviewed, a black person interviewing a white person about their thoughts on why Black Lives Matter, which is fine, but the black person was given no opportunity to reflect upon his personal perspectives about why Black Lives Matter. And it was just completely, the irony was completely lost on the white person who was being interviewed. I've had a Facebook friend continue to insist that when he says all lives matter, he means it in the best possible way. But he refused to specifically articulate the Black Lives Matter, even after a series of really considered, thoughtful, insightful posts as to why what he was saying was problematic. And Janelle touched on this just now, people who conflate anti-Blackness and the Black Lives Matter movement with everything else, including animal rights, I kid you not, and LGBT plus rights and other forms of racism, which are all really valid, which are really important. We all need to be each other's allies in the fight against those things, and we need to lend our voices to each other's battles. And we can talk about intersectionality, for days on end. But right now, we want to talk about anti-Black racism. And we want to make sure that other people know what that means. And that's a space that we want to hold quite clearly at the moment. And it doesn't mean that racism against brown people, other minorities, that they face is less painful or less damaging. It just means that sometimes when we want to talk about our Blackness, that's what we need to talk about. Like, I'm a Black woman, but today I would rather see a Black male doctor than see a white female British doctor, just because of the limitations a white female doctor, as far as I'm concerned, will have. So when we really want to talk about, anti-Blackness and Black Lives Matter, it's really frustrating actually at the moment to have people negate that. Also, I've been really fed up of performative activism. So a lot of white people talking on stage about their privilege and how they need to use their privilege for the betterment of everybody, but not really taking the time to understand white fragility, not taking the time to understand white victimhood. White privilege is not something I feel like being constantly hit over the head with, and it's been happening quite a lot, I have to say. So I'm exhausted and I am angry. Most of all, I'm angry at those people who are basically saying that this is not an issue and just refuse to get it. And that's not just white people, it's Black people as well. But I've realized I'm also really angry sometimes at the white people who love me more than anything in the world, like my husband, who are desperate to get it. They do get it most of the time. They stand in solidarity, but then they inadvertently say the wrong thing, or they demonstrate their inherent prejudice. And usually we're too polite, right? We just let it go. Just goes over our head. But right now, like at this moment where we're talking about things, I think it's really important for us to say when we're angry and to say when they're wrong, and for white people to not be so fragile to hear that. So that's kind of like my first point, actually. And really, don't get me wrong, I think we really need our allies. I'm amazed that there are 100 people on this chat that are keen to understand, keen to get insights, keen to hear. And now more than ever, we really need you, but we need you to do two things whilst you're doing this. And one, and this is what my talk is about, listening and learning. So on the first hand, I want people to just listen. I want people to listen to me, allow me to get angry, because it's just the space that we're in right now. And it might be even as when you're trying to agree with me, but you inadvertently say something stupid, sorry, or stereotype or discriminatory. As I said, we're usually too polite. Someone just posted that in the Facebook, on the chat agreeing. But please allow me the right to be angry. Like, don't defend yourself. Just try and hear what I'm saying in my anger, okay? And learn to do better. Also, just listen to the people who fundamentally disagree with you. I'm learning this for myself. You know, we are in our echo chambers. We listen to each other. Like, all the people in here mostly probably agree with me. And I think sometimes we need to step out of our comfort zone and listen to the people who don't agree with us. So Black people, it can be quite damaging for us to be in those spaces. But I think white people who aren't internalizing the pain, I think it's important for you guys to hold those spaces, to make those arguments. I don't want to engage in the Facebook war with the people on my Facebook who are just saying things that don't make sense, because it's too draining, it's too much, it's too personal. And I'm really keen for white people to go to war on my behalf. Please do so. But it means that you also have to put yourself in those spaces, but that are maybe a bit too damaging for me to do. And again, like, this isn't everybody. I'm talking about my own perspective, so bear with me if other people don't feel this way. I think also you need to listen to Black people when they're talking, and when they want to talk, give us the space to talk. So again, things that I've seen at rallies, you know, it's like, don't have Black people at the back of the queue waiting to speak whilst you jump to the front to hold the platform. You know, we're finding our voice right now, and just try not to drown us out, okay? And also, when we're speaking our truths, when we're talking about the microaggressions and the unconscious bias that Janelle was talking about just now, don't use it as an example to show how you understand or the ways in which something similar has happened to you. It might be you trying to show solidarity, but you're also, in a way, it negates our experiences. And the fact that you know, you will hear 100 people talk about the same thing. Janelle's experience about people saying you're articulate and thinking that's a compliment is so common among my girlfriends, you know, and we think it's problematic, but other people don't. So I'm really encouraging people to just hear us when we're saying to you that these are things that are problematic and why, okay? And then finally, just learn. So do the work. There's so much online. There's so much that you can learn for yourselves, please. So just go ahead and do that. You know, learn so that you can speak from a position of sensitivity and informed knowledge when I don't have the voice to do so. Learn about why people in the UK are protesting, and don't just assume it's because of what's happening in America. Learn about the less sexy aspects of this movement. Learn about the importance of buying black, for instance. You know, and really just do the work. There are podcasts, there are posts, there's, you know, social media, there's books, there's movies, there's TV, just everything. So please just go ahead, try and educate yourselves a little bit more, please. And I do apologize. I know I've come across a bit strident today, but as I said at the beginning, I'm a bit exhausted and I'm a bit angry. And thankfully my time has run out, so I will stop now.
Thank you so much, Freida. That was
Okay, good evening. My name is Ivory, and thank you for having me this evening. And I'm actually working around the aspiration of young people, but really embracing a conscious mind. And I think for too long, we have kind of created a complacency in really encouraging our young people to understand who they are and where they come from as people, and be proud of who they are. And to some extent, there's a lost identity in that journey of theirs. And I think we as adults owe it to them to create the foundation so that they can begin to develop their understanding of self, of the value of self, and be able to then negotiate their pathway as they go along. For too long, I would argue that we have lost identity. I would argue that even as we speak right now and the moment where we have this elated publicity around, you know, the Black Lives Matter, and also COVID prescribed measures. It's the fact that people, or if not young people, as adults, as guardians, as parents, I think what we have done, we have conformed to creating that nice space or that safe space, so we don't voice out what we feel anymore. We don't actually, we kind of assimilate, and rather than actually integrate. And so until this point, this moment, this time where George Floyd happened, before we begin to actually create that noise that should have been created years ago. And I think we owe it to our young people. We owe it to our young people to give them the space to learn to understand themselves, to create a space where they understand their own history and not be embarrassed about their own history, because it's not the norm anymore to talk about histories that belong to us, you know. And so for me, I think as parents and as individuals, we need to create that space. The space is important for young people, because they don't understand why they're the ones that are most stop and search. They don't understand why they're the most incarcerated in prisons. They don't understand why that they are always the one that feel left out, don't feel part of, don't belong. So in that context, I think we as adults and we as parents actually have a responsibility to ensure that we are actually teaching our children what we're supposed to be teaching them. Now, the reason I've said all this is that the structural and and the systems dictate some of the way along the way where how our children see us, and we cannot continue to talk in a way that does not produce something productive, where the child see more than the talking. So in essence, we kind of need to be able to walk the walk rather than just actually. So we are big as a family of Africans and Caribbeans, that we want our child to do well. We want the child to be educated. We want the child to be able to respect people, and there's an essence of shame if that doesn't happen. However, the child sees, the child understands. So we can talk about, following our pathways, understanding our culture, understanding our traditions, but if we're not actually doing what we're supposed to do and actually walking the talk, then how on earth do we expect the child to be able to follow that ideal? So it is crucial that we stress the importance of history that has gone past. Histories of the ones like, I think it was Janelle that just mentioned, Stephen Lawrence. A lot of the children that I work with at the moment don't know that history unless we teach them those histories. School doesn't teach them those histories. We have a duty of responsibility to do so. We have the duty of responsibility to educate the Black child. We have a duty of responsibility to ensure that they have a conscious mindset that keeps them alert, that allows them to do their own research and unlearn the things that they've been taught that is not factually true. We have a responsibility to ensure that, we encourage the child to ensure that they can create a conversation, that about their own history, their own culture, and they know, you know, the struggles that we have struggled. You know, we talk about George Floyd passing on, but wait a minute, we in Britain, the Windrush happened. How many of us stood up? How many of us let the child know that this means something to us? We didn't, you know, and these are the things that we really need to really do to empower our child, because we need to change the mindset of the child for tomorrow. This is a brilliant opportunity to do that, because we're talking about the race issues, and nobody else is going to do that for us except ourselves. And it is really, really high time that we create the platform, the spaces, and give that opportunity to the young person to actually start thinking in a different way, so that the narrative is different, so that they create, so we don't follow the same rhetoric, and create an opportunity for a better build tomorrow for the child of an African descent, or for all Black, African, Asian, minority ethnic children. I think it's crucial. I think we have a duty of responsibility to do that.
Certain Blacks is an arts organisation. We support diverse work. And when I say diverse work, it's the widest thing. You know, we support Black artists. We put on jazz. We put on live art. We put circus on. We do cabaret. We do theatre. I work with people crying in the wilderness at the Young Vic. I also work for Arts Council England. That's another thing. And what I wanted to talk about is, tell you the story. How did I get here? How did I get here producing this work? And what does it mean? How I got an organisation called Certain Blacks. Certain Blacks comes from a song by a company called Art Ensemble Chicago. They're a band. And it's what you would call active jazz. It was there in the 70s. It really does sort of support diverse 70s action. So I want to tell you how I got here. Really, I started off by my uncle was moving to Canada, and in early 70s or so, and he gave me two things. He gave me a box of books and he gave me a guitar. I learned to play the guitar and I read the box of books. But in the box of books, it had books by Stokely Carmichael. It had Caesar behind Bobby Steele, Black Panthers. It had Mao's Little Red Book. It also had books on arts and race and culture, Black histories about Egyptians, Black Egyptians, things that I never knew of. You know, the whole sort of thing of the long thousands and thousands and thousands years of history of Black culture. I got involved. Through that, I ended up basically forming my own political views. At the time, we're talking the late 70s, 80s, I'm that old. In that time, we had people like National Front. And they weren't just anywhere, they were on our streets. They were in Lewisham. I'm from Lewisham. They were on the streets of Lewisham. I used to go out, protest on the streets of Lewisham. This is like 13, 14, doing paper selling. I used to do vigils outside the South African embassy. You've got to remember that when I was younger, it was apartheid. I never thought I'd see the end of apartheid. You know, I used to go out there, do night vigils and stuff. And I have to admit, I was young. I have to admit, left-wing politics actually educated me. I do see this as much as a class thing, as a thing about. I come from a working class background. I come from a working class background in Lewisham. I was educated by Socialist Workers' Party, Communist Party, and other people. You know, I read Marx. Marx taught me economics. I didn't have any of that. I went and studied economics. A-level, I got that from reading Marx. You know, I'm not saying everybody come out and do that, but that is the sort of education. That's what came from having those books there. So I thought, if I got a bit of education, I did a lot of protesting during that time. Ended up working for a bank, didn't like that. Wanted to study music. I ended up studying music. I went to university in Newcastle and Tyne. Now, I was naive. I'm a kid from London. I didn't know that there were no black people in Newcastle at the time. This was like 80s. There was no, there were a lot of Asian people, but there was very few black people. So I ended up at Newcastle Poly, which is now University of Northumbria, studying creative performing arts. It was rough. You know, you had to fight for your existence there. You know, they not so much just me. I was at uni, but the Asian guys there were really embattled. You know, shops with screens on it, etc. But what we did, there's a few other people that went up there that we studied. We formed our own things. We put on nights. We put on political cabarets. We put on people like Henry Normal. We put on Lem Sisse. I don't know if you heard of poets like Lem Sisse, and brought up Benjamin Zachariah, and you know, we did a lot of spoken word things. And we did performances, and it was semi-political. It was our way of having our word and our life. So went there, started to make a life out of doing the arts. Came back to London. My first job was working for Greenwich. London. I was artist in residence on an estate called Ferrier Estate in Greenwich. Rough estate. I was there trying to do community work, community arts, developing local work. When I was there, and this is where it comes back. This is where it comes around to a lot of what the other speakers have said. A guy called Roland Adams was killed on Thamesmead. Greenwich, who was so good and what you call diverse, they wanted to do an anti-racist festival. Problem is, they didn't have anybody of colour working for them. They were doing a big festival, and they did it every year, but nobody of colour. So I was the closest thing. I ran Greenwich and set up Greenwich Anti-Racist Festival. It killed me. You know, I got a lot of people that I respected. Simba Project was down there. A lot of people I know, again, because I'm from the area, to do this festival. Put on the Jazz Warriors. Put on again some political education, entertainment. I didn't work in the arts after that for 5-6 years. Couldn't do it. It was the arts being used as a political tool. Especially, and this is before Stephen Lawrence, and I know the area where Stephen Lawrence was killed. It was an area that I would never touch, never go to, you know. I fast forward as I'm getting to almost now. Now I work at Arts Council. You know, I've run a few art centres, etc. You could say I work for a big arts organisation as well as doing the Arts Council fund what I do. And I moved on now, segue, because of the things about structural racism and the whole sort of fact of having worked in the arts since I've worked in the arts since about 91. I'm still fighting in there. I'm still looking for that recognition, because that recognition makes a difference. When you get people like Kwame running the Young Vic, it makes a difference to who works there and the voices that come out of there. I got very, very mad recently because Arts Council came out, and not just Arts Council, but other theatres and theatre schools, etc., came out, and they voiced Black Lives Matters. I was sitting there, having just said my history, sitting inside the Arts Council thinking, but what about you supporting the diversity that's always been there? You know, there's an assumption when I work in the arts that I work in carnival. I work in, you know, I work in recognisable, what they would call black arts, not in live arts, not in theatre, not putting on contemporary work, etc. That's where I've been pigeonholed, not moved up. I've got people that work at that organisation that used to work for me. You know, when they come out and they do, I had friends ringing me up saying, you see what Arts Council's doing? You know, that is hard. That comes down to the structural racism. It comes down to, you know, things that the talkers the speakers earlier talked about being sidetracked, pigeonholed about what you do, your experience not being not being regarded, and also down to the fact that it's like that history. You know, the winners or the people that hunt and win, they're the ones that write the hunter is the one that writes the history of the hunt. If you can't have your, if you don't have your words, if you don't have a space to speak, if you don't have people representing you and saying, look, not just I look like you, but I'm going to give you the chance to say whatever, being LGBT, being black, being Asian, whatever, not just the white guy. And I know the guy that I'm thinking about sitting there going, no, we're not going to do some of that. Or this is what we think diversity looks like. Somebody telling me what diverse arts looks like. Somebody telling me what I should be putting on the stage so it looks like it fits and ticks your boxes. That history is to say, Benjamin Zephaniah said it when he moved to London. We've been fighting on the streets for years and years and years. I live in an area, Canning Town. I'm sitting looking at the Nightingale Hospital, which is the XL Centre. This is the biggest area that's been hit by C19, and it happens to be the most diverse area in London.
So, question to all, but inspired by Janelle's comments on senior positions in work. In a situation where racism is structural and systemic and has ramifications from the classroom onwards, how would you advise companies and institutions to go about providing opportunities for Black employees who may not have excelled and gained qualifications that match their colleagues due to their experiences at school?
I think that's a very good question. And I think it's right that potentially, depending on where somebody was raised, they may not have been able to attain certain levels within education, etc. One thing I will point out, though, having said that, is that given the opportunity and given the chance, the academic achievement and attainment amongst Black people in particular is very, very high. Statistics prove that. So I just thought I'd mention that. But yes, if there are structural disadvantages from an early age, then that can create a problem. I think the first thing for organisations to do is to recognise that there's a problem, especially at the senior level, and then they need to address that. There needs to be a massive education piece to understand. Well, first of all, to accept. I think it goes back to Freida's point. Excuse me. There's a lot of this. I've heard a term recently, and it's whataboutism. So when you raise something, you are often bombarded from white people in particular with, well, what about this, and what about that, and what about all lives, and etc. etc. So I think there just needs to be the space to be open to listen, and listen with the intent to listen, as opposed to listening with the intent to reply and rebut. That's the first thing. Education is a massive part of that, and there's so much work to be done, but this has definitely started that chain of events that I'm hopeful about, and I'm sure many others are hopeful about. So I think a lot of organisations need to relook at their structures, relook at their hierarchy, and really be honest with themselves about how diversity sits and looks within their organisation. And if they realise that there's a lack at the top, then they need to understand why. To address the point about staff who maybe haven't been able to attain or achieve, it's quite simple. Give them the opportunity to be able to do that. Training, many organisations have training budgets. I started off myself as a graduate trainee at London Underground, and there was a budget for me to go and do a master's degree. So many organisations have training and education budgets. Really identify what individuals' training needs might be, and then start from there, and be absolutely genuinely committed to developing individuals of particularly a Black background, and other minority ethnic backgrounds. But I just want to, we're talking about the Black experience here, and I want to kind of keep it focused on that. So genuinely and actively and willingly wanting to develop staff. Unfortunately, there are mixed views about this, but unfortunately here in the UK, positive discrimination is illegal. In America, it's legal. And when I say positive discrimination, I mean actually setting targets and quotas so that you have certain people in positions. I have mixed feelings about it, but I think that there more can be done. Instead of it just being illegal, that more can be done to find a halfway house. So yeah, I think that it starts with acceptance, education, and then a real will and desire to educate and train people within an organisation.
Thank you, Janelle. Abba, you had your hand up. Was it to answer?
You to Janelle's response. I would say you need to take the whole person, you know, particularly culturally, and appreciating that person, because their ways of doing things might be different. So don't make a presumptuous, you know, don't be presumptuous about what they can do without actually giving them an opportunity to be able to do. And a lot of the time, I think that's where a lot of Black people will get to the interview stage, but they won't cross over the interview stage. And I think if organizations and employers can be open-minded, and if you see something good in that person, then there is something good in that person. It's about how you nurture it and bring out the best out of them. And yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Abba.
So it's an interesting question, because the assumption was made about how to bring people up who do not have maybe the necessary skills and education. But we already know that even when you have the necessary skills and education, you are still underrepresented. So there's lots of data that shows that people who have the same qualifications, the same education, the same level of education, same attainment at the educational stage, do not yet progress or do not get employed at the same rates and do not progress at the same rates. So the question still has to talk about like the unconscious bias, the systemic racism that exists in the workplace that causes people not to progress, retain Black people at the same rates, despite having equal qualifications, before we even talk about if you'd had less, you know, if you were less qualified. So I think that they're two things, but in a way they're the same. And I just wanted to raise that, really.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that point, actually, because I think the assumption is that the lack of talent and progression happens because those abilities, individuals don't have those abilities, but it often is about the opportunity. So it is essential and important that where those structural and institutional barriers exist, they are dismantled, because it is only then we will have an equality of opportunities. It's not because younger people lack ambition or talent, it's because sometimes the structures that exist inadvertently present and put up barriers in order that they cannot progress. So the question isn't what can you do for the young person. The start for me has to be within the organization. They have to dismantle those institutions, those systems and barriers that prevent progression.
Hi. Yeah, I've just taken on the role of curating poets and poetry. Some of it's kind of group poetry, communal stuff. We're doing it online. It's Melo Baku, by the way. And the first two poems that I've had through are from white artists. Both of them are very supportive of Black Lives Matters. The first one is I Can't Breathe. There's a kind of listed thing about I can't breathe, but it does end with I can't breathe, said this person, I can't breathe, said that person, different context, and it ended up I can't breathe, said the policeman underneath his riot gear. So there's a bit of a turning there. And then the second poem was a woman listing how she worries for her child, that's her privilege, and then she worries about this, and then she doesn't have to worry about that. So she's doing the, you know, this is my privilege. So it's all supportive and educational. And at the same time, it's also shot by a white filmmaker as well. So it's three white artists who contributed. And yeah, I just wondered, I know that Freida was particularly speaking to that at some point about not wanting to hear too much or at all, I don't know. So, and I'm always interested in how people do show up and how much of it we want to try and push away, or ask that it be people show up in particular ways, and how can that be managed, as particularly for myself as a curator, what I invite. I'm trying to find some words to put out on social media to say, you know, there's no pressure on anyone to speak, but particularly if you're a writer or a poet of color, and especially of a Black, Caribbean and African background, I want to welcome your poems and stories if you'd like to, you know, that kind of things. That's my idea about how to invite, but then also how to curate when I do get what I think will be more and more white voices on the matter.
Thank you.
Can I just, I don't have an answer, but I just have some thoughts, because I know I'm quite angry. Like yesterday I had a talk about how important our allies are, by the way. So it's just the space that I'm in today. And I think it's absolutely essential. You know, we are a particular proportion of population. We are not going to make the change ourselves. We need people to get it. And I think that even people engaging with things is appropriate. And also we have to remember that people might get things wrong, or they will get things wrong even, but that's okay. At least they're willing, and we shouldn't put people off, or have, you know, the people who are allies, we don't want them to scurry back just because of our anger in a way, or our worry that they're not getting it right. So I think we also have to give people the space to get it wrong, or to get it a little bit right, and not worry too much about that. But I think definitely we have to encourage Black voices and brown voices and other voices who are minoritized, I think somebody said in the chat, because it can't just be the voices of a particular group about this issue. I think that's my problem. We definitely need to hear from everybody, and we need people to feel comfortable and confident to do so, and accept that people won't get it perfectly right. Like, honestly, my husband posts 1,000,001 things. I'm always like, oh God, I wish he'd just stop, you know? But he's doing it and I'm not. And at least he's making a difference, you know? So that's my thoughts on that.
There's a question to Janelle. We have spoken about unconscious bias. What are your thoughts on affirmative action?
Well, I think that's what I described when I was saying, you know, positive discrimination. I think in this country we call it affirmative action. Well, positive discrimination is actually having targets and quotas. I think affirmative action is creating policies around trying to promote and encourage and increase diversity within organisations. My thoughts are anything that can help towards doing that is absolutely necessary and absolutely key. What it can't be, though, is a tick box exercise or lip service, and that is what it's been for too many years. You know, it's like we do this because we have to, rather than because we feel impassioned to. And I think that's where the mindset shift needs to come within organizations, in that there needs to be a passion from organizations to understand that actually when you have a diverse team, your organization will thrive. And if you allow people to flourish within your organization, no matter the color of their skin and no matter their background, then you will ultimately have a team that is diverse, and they can bring their cultural experiences within that mix, their creativity, their innovation. I think with unconscious bias, what's happened all too often is that a lot of the time people are prevented from moving. There are those barriers there, but also back to what Freida mentioned about white fragility. Often as Black people, we have been conditioned to protect white fragility. We do it a lot, so we don't speak up and we don't say how we feel. So I think it's a combination of all things, but affirmative action is definitely one arm of making a difference, but it being real, and not just you know, lip service.
That Black academic friends prefer the term, in quotation, minoritized rather than BAME, because it highlights historical significance of happening to someone. What does the panel think? Is there someone from the panel that would like to address that?
Sorry, Clive, go ahead then. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I hate the term BAME. You know, all of these terms have been created by other people, you know, and it's an acronym. And I know where it used to be BAM, and then Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, it got extended because it was missing out East Asians. And I think minoritized really works. It's about taking ownership of the language rather than having it put on you. You know, recently I've started using person of color. I'm a black person. Always that's you know, getting away from people calling you a colored person has been a big one. You know what I mean? I'm a black person, and that was the thing. And the rest of it, I really have got no time for the acronyms. I'm sorry. And so if minoritized, if it comes in, if that is an academic term that academics are using, black academics, fine. But I think we need to get away from those terms of generalizing about minorities, etc., and be positive about it. I don't want to be in some box that somebody comes up with, you know? Sorry.
Thank you, Clive. Abba, you had your hand up?
Yes, indeed, I did. The truth of the matter is these acronyms, people and particularly politicians are actually giving us these titles. We didn't create these ourselves, and when they're ready, they change it from BME to BAME to whatever, and we kind of need to own it. And the latest that is given is BAME. BAME for me, I think it still illustrates that we are lower in terms of, if you look at what BAME stands for, is Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, and within that, the only group that's got an identity within that is Asian, and we are kind of a construct, if you like. So we need to move away from these acronyms, because also when we say BAME, really, it should actually be BAME if we're going to say that, but we don't. We kind of say BAME. So what does that really mean? What really does it mean? And really, who are we trying to identify? So for me, acronyms I do not like. And if we're going to, and many people, the recent one I heard was African, Asian, minority, ethnic, and it goes on and on and on. And I think we need to be careful, because it's all labeling, and these labels attached is not really a positive move forward in terms of what did the lady say? Minoritized, is it? And in terms of that, I suppose it's better than minority, but I think I'm not for acronyms. I think we need to have individual grouping identity, you know, and it's wholesome when it's individually grouped, and you know, so I would prefer not to use the acronyms.
Okay, lovely. So thank you all for your questions. Nkechi, over to you.
Thanks, Angela. So my name is Nkechi, and I told Angela I'm going to be the voice of the average Joe today. And I called my section All Black People Look the Same, because the reflections of this current period reminded me of something that my friends and I would get used to hearing when someone forgot our name or couldn't quite remember where they knew us from. And I think for a lot of the Black community, kind of global current events have triggered a lot of memories of kind of subtle and more aggressive forms of racism. And so a lot of us are now questioning, should our responses to racism in the past have been different, and how might they change in the future? And for me, it's also caused me to reflect on what it means to be Black at various points in my life and why. So my family, we never had urine or worse through our letterbox. We never had racist graffiti on our door. But that doesn't mean we weren't impacted by attitudes towards Black people in other ways. And what I'd sort of like to go over in the next 10 minutes is how preconceived perceptions of the Black community particularly negative ones, and not really seeing the needs or the value of the person who happens to be Black, really shape all our interactions and then the systems and the structures that we kind of live in. So in terms of my identity, I was born in London. I always felt Nigerian though, because my parents are Nigerian and they came over to work, and this was a positive thing. So they're from the Igbo part of Nigeria, and we were kind of immersed in this culture in our house. So the music, the smells, the food. And I remember vividly going to Nigeria when I was about 5 and feeling, you know, very at home. And then moving into primary school, so because I grew up in northwest London, it was predominantly an Irish Catholic primary school, so we were in a minority, but we identified with this community because they were really proud and protective of their culture and their heritage, and this is something that was happening in our own houses as well. So if the kids called me Ketchup rather than Nkechi, I dismissed it because they were Nigerian and didn't know how to say my name properly, rather than anything more sinister, but I'll touch on my name later on. And my parents did a good job of shielding us in primary school and protecting us, and we felt very safe and loved. It was only when I got to secondary school that Blackness for the first time became something negative or different. So again, as a Black girl, I was in a minority. We mixed with girls who were from other African countries, from the Caribbean, but there were not many of us. There were about 7 out of 100 girls in my year. And I don't remember seeing any Black teachers in our school. Only one who was an African man, but he was made fun of because of his African accent. So that taught you that actually you stand out if you're African, and they make fun of you if you're African. Although in my home, we were very proud to be African. But it was a white teacher who made me feel terrible for being a Black African girl with Afro hair. And we were on a school trip, and she did the head count at the back of the bus, and she stopped in front of me and said to me, "What's that on your head? It looks like a toilet brush." So imagine an 11-year-old girl, somebody who's an authority, an educator, publicly humiliating you at the back of the bus because of your hair. And we were taught in our house not to disrespect anybody in authority. So you learn, you stand out because of your hair, because you're Black, but you can't really challenge that, especially in the school system. And growing up as a teenager, you just want to fit in. And as teenagers, our parents always told us, you know, you have to work twice as hard as your white counterparts. So for us, you're learning as a teenager, you may not fit in, but you have to work twice as hard because the system's not set up for you as a Black person to win. And then you're conditioned by the things you see in the media when you're growing up, that in our society, a Black person can only win if they're in a sports or if they're in rap music, or if you watch the news at the time we were growing up, you'd be relegated to a life of crime. And that's not something that happened in our household, because our mum was a nurse, she worked very hard, and then you're trying to reconcile with that within yourself and try to come to terms with your own identity. But as a teenager, I used to cringe, especially when a supply teacher came in, and I came to resent my name, because the teacher would either give up and say they can't be bothered to say my name, or well-meaning classmates would try and explain my name to the teacher. And my name has a meaning. You know, my name means God gave me to my parents, God's gift. So it's a beautiful name. But my go-to name socially became Natasha or Nicola, because I couldn't bother to explain to people that I had Nigerian heritage. I was Black, that I stood out, but I just wanted to fit in. I also used to get told as a teenager that I don't look African, as if that's a compliment. Then you're being conditioned to think being African is something bad, and all African people, all Black people look the same, when we don't. So then as a teenager, you try to hide your Blackness, you try to hide your Africanness. You're told not to rock the boat. And at home, we got so used to not seeing ourselves represented in all parts of society. So if we saw things like something like Family Fortunes, we saw a Black family on there, we were rooting for them to win, because a win for them was a win for all of us. One of the first times that I experienced racism, I was about 18 on the bus, and I worked just outside London, and I got the bus on my own. And a man who was much older than me turned round to me and said to me, "You're the ugliest thing I've ever seen. Look at the rubber lips on you." And I couldn't believe it, and I was shocked and I was slightly scared. But how do you, as an 18-year-old girl, sit on the bus, again at the back of the bus, and somebody's saying this to you, and none of the other passengers are stopping him, none of them are challenging him. So you quickly learn as well that nobody's going to stand up for you or fight for you or tell you that anything's right. And you learn because you're told not to speak up, not to say anything yourself. And so as a kid, as a teenager, you carry all these into the workplace. And I've largely worked in the public sector. And early on in my career, I knew if I walked into a room, into an office, I'd be one of only a few Black people. And so because of my Blackness, I would stand out. And I felt uncomfortable in those situations. But rather than focus on myself, I'd be focusing on trying to make other people more comfortable with my Blackness. I'd be the one to try and crack a joke, to make them laugh, rather than trying to be straightforward. I try not to be straightforward because I didn't want to be labeled as aggressive or attacking anybody. So what you learn through school, through work, is to gradually tone down your identity. One of the organisations I did work for had a largely BME population, and it was touched on earlier that you might have a large BME population at the lower levels, and at the senior levels it's mainly white senior managers. And so this organisation was described as Guinness, and people Black and white openly described it. When I look back now, I wonder why none of us challenged that structure. So you learn to accept it and not rock the boat. Which I wouldn't do now, I don't think. That's not to say I haven't had positive experiences in the workplace. You know, I had a manager who was white and happened to be married to a mixed race man, but I loved this manager because she saw me for me, not a Black girl, not an African girl, not a Nigerian girl. She saw my skills and qualities, and she challenged me constructively. She encouraged me. She even encouraged me to apply for more senior positions. But if you're taught from a young age, you know, you have to work twice as hard, but you shouldn't rock the boat, your name's not acceptable, your skin's not acceptable, you don't feel comfortable in yourself, then you won't bring your authentic self to the workplace 100% of the time. And that's me doing a disservice to myself and where I work, but also the organisation is not getting the best of me. And a lot of us in the Black community feel like that we can't give our best selves to the organisation because they won't accept us. And then you carry these kind of conflicts in your identity and whether you want to stand out or not stand out or be accepted into adulthood, into motherhood. And I, as a Black woman, have felt dismissed in maternity care, health services, just because of the colour of my skin. One of my children was very ill in hospital. She was about 2 years old, and the doctors do their rounds, and one of them stopped and said to me that her hair, again her hair, looks like devil horns. And I just smiled and said nothing. And because at that point, this is somebody who's meant to be a caregiver, and I don't want to compromise my child's healthcare by telling this doctor where to go, telling her that she shouldn't say this about my child, that she should be focusing on giving my child the best care possible. And with our children, my husband and I are still having the same conversations that my parents had with us about having to work twice as hard before they get noticed, before they succeed. And their school friends are much more diverse than mine ever were. And as a Black woman, there are things that we still face socially as well. So we like to go on holidays. We still do research to check whether a country is racist or not. Why? Because we've learned that we're not welcome in certain spaces. We're the ones who other holiday makers come and tell us to keep quiet by the pool, even though there are other holiday makers in groups sitting by the pool. We are the ones who are causing irritation. We disturb their peace. Or we're still treated as curiosity or an object. I still get asked by people I don't know at parties, can they touch my hair? So if I fast forward to this point in my life, the way I feel is that all these experiences make me now refuse to be apologetic for being Black. To me, it's a positive. You know, there's a t-shirt I used to wear that said melanin popping, and a friend's mother who wasn't Black asked me what that meant. And I told her, from my point of view, it's about celebrating what makes us unique and special as Black people. And the lesson for me at that moment was that we can all start conversations in our own way and challenge the way that society is conditioned to think about us as Black people in our schools, in our work, on holidays and socially. I am so many things as well as a Black woman. I'm a wife, I have a master's degree, I have 4 children, I can swim. Yes, I can swim. I was a school governor, and I have the right to be in all spaces in society, go to the theatre matinee on my own, go to Michelin star restaurants, take my kids camping if I want to. So there's still an urgent need for all of us to know and accept that being Black is not just one thing, and challenge misconceptions. You know, the slave trade didn't happen because Black people are uncivilized and lazy. We're not disproportionately dying from COVID just because we are Black. George Floyd didn't cause his own murder because he's a Black man with an underlying health condition. My hair is not a toilet brush. My skin doesn't make me the ugliest thing that anyone has ever seen. So if I stand out because I'm Black, I'm glad now, because I won't allow society to dehumanize me or devalue me. And it's not acceptable to use my Blackness against me. I'd be horrified if anyone today thought I was a spokesperson for the whole Black community, but I hope that kind of my experiences have sparked an understanding that all Black people aren't the same. You know, we do share a common sense of loss when one of us is needlessly and violently murdered by those in authority. And many of us have the same stories of racism in our schools and our workplaces and other institutions. And I'm really sad that a whole new generation is seeing atrocities that some people may have naively thought were relegated to the 1960s. And I really believe that we need systemic change to tackle inequalities in social structure, in our policies and laws. But I really would also argue that this will only be effective if everyone starts to see the Black person for who they are. We're intelligent, diverse, occupying all spaces of society. We're in your playgrounds, your workplace tea points, your architects, engineers, musicians, dancers, and so much more. Move away from seeing us as a homogenous group, because if you accept that all Black people are the same, you strip us of our individual identity and our value. Let's challenge the teachers, the medical staff, the men on the buses who push their negative ideas of the Black community. So I hope that the conversations that we're now openly starting to have really start to drive positive and lasting change.
In there. So my name's Andrea Oliver and I'm a drama psychotherapist. I work within the mental health team within ETS in Manchester, what's emotional trauma support team, and I work with children, mostly people who have been adopted, but within doing that I've worked also with within schools. And whilst I've been working in schools, I have seen a lot that I will come on to in a bit. But my work is, as I was saying, it's about trauma. It's about understanding the child's needs and the trauma that that child has gone through. We have talked a lot about intergenerational trauma. And that intergenerational trauma is trauma that, you know, your parents might have that they pass on to pass on to their children. But what my work is quite often is generational and transgenerational trauma, and that is the trauma that we are now facing, and that is what slavery did to the Black community. And that's where, you know, we are now facing and things have been brought to the forefront when things are not seen and when things are not spoken about. So my work is about education. I work within education and I try to educate my young people to understand their backstory and that they didn't just end up here and that they didn't just come on a boat one day because we were invited, and that there is more behind that story that they do not tell us. And they don't tell us this because they don't want us to know. If you think about all the things that we have learnt within school. We learn stuff on the kings and queens of you know, Europe and of England. I can tell you stories about them, most of them. But what they do not tell you is what they did to us. They leave that part out of the discussion and out of the education. And they do that because they don't want us to be educated in that way. So when they look at slavery and they say, okay, you know, slavery happened and we're looking at it now, they look at it from an American perspective. So if you go into a school within October time, that's what they're looking at. They're saying, oh, you know, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, but they're not looking at it over what we have done, what has happened to us, and the generational trauma that we are now facing and seeing in our society. And that is coming to the forefront because we are angry, and we are supposed to be angry. This thing has happened to us, so let us talk about it. Don't shut us up. Don't tell us to sit back down. We need to have these discussions, and things need to change. And things need to change so that, and the way I can only see things changing is through schooling and through getting the actual education system change. You know, everyone seems to look at it from the top down, but I think we need to look at it from the down up and start looking at it from a way in which we can change and work with the actual racism that we've got and kind of change the settings of everything. And by doing that and by educating everyone, not just you know, Black people within our society, but the whole community that is going through the education system that they have to go through, they then become more knowledgeable and then be able to go, okay, this is what racism is, this is what I need to do to stop it. And that is where we need to focus on. And if we don't focus on that, we're losing out on a whole population that are going to just be uneducated within that setting. And then you get, you know, the young kind of 20-year-olds that are then shouting out about Black Lives Matter when their other counterparts, their white counterparts, don't understand why they're shouting so loud. And then we have to have these conversations that I'm having with children now that are saying, why have they knocked down this statue? And I'm like, they've knocked down this statue because this statue was of a slave owner. Yes, he gave so much money to a city, but he was a slave owner first and foremost. So let's address that and then move on from there. And this is where I don't understand when, you know, we've got governments that has had loads of petitions over years to get that statue taken down, and they haven't done it. Why haven't they done it? It's because they don't want to do it, because within hours of one being knocked down, another one is taken down. These things need to be put into museums. These things need to be told to our young people, so our young people grow up knowing exactly what happened, and with knowledge, it's power. And then they can feel empowered by themselves and empowered by their Blackness to be the next generation moving forward without the scars that we have. Because realistically, every single one of us has the scars of our forefathers, and we are holding on to that. So, and we, you know, I want to, the minute I walk out my door, there will be someone of color, or there'll be someone telling me that I'm not worthy to be in that space. And that is the problem, because we need to be able to be in them spaces, but we also need to be able to be educated about them spaces too. And we can't just let it go and be okay with it anymore. We are we're in 2020, and we're talking about stuff that I thought was in the 60s. And when I woke up and heard about George, I was heartbroken to hear that, you know, someone has just been brutally murdered and a life been taken because of the colour of their skin. That is not fair. And that is where the anger comes from. That's where the frustration comes from. And we should be angry. There was a person last week that told me, why am I angry? And I'm thinking, I'm angry because we're dying. And I'm angry because no one seems to care that this is happening. And the only reason why we've got on this bandwagon now is because it's in the public domain. Because if it wasn't in that public domain, it would have just been another statistic of a Black guy dying within police custody. And that's over there. What's happening in our land? What's happening with, you know, in England? What's happening in the UK? And we need to really address that. We can't keep looking across the pond to other things and saying, oh, it's happening over there, look, it's happening over there, because it's not just happening over there, it's happening here too. And we really need to address the situation and make sure that whatever is going on is being sorted out, and sorted out quickly, because, you know, we're all having children, we're all growing older, and things are not changing. I don't want to be, you know, 50 years old and having another man mutually killed, or it's terrifying. And to bring your children up in a world where things has not changed in any way, shape or form, it just makes me feel terrible. And I think that's why I'm angry, and that's why I'm speaking out today. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Angela. Good evening, everybody. Angela, thank you for setting up this, and thank you for inviting me. Just a little bit of context. Terry Adams is the name. I work for Arts Council England as a relationship manager for diversity in the Southeast. Many of you will know Arts Council England, but in short, we are the arm's length body funded by national lottery funding and public money to support and develop art and creativity in England. My role specifically is twofold. Firstly, it is to support the agenda Arts Council England has in terms of ensuring the money that it is made available to artists individually and organisations is recognises and includes elements of diversity, inclusion and relevance. So I will speak to organisations and advise them how we as an organisation, funding them, expect to see those issues addressed in their activities. The other arm of my work is that I go out and support individual organisations to develop their own practices. Specifically for me, this means I will work with organisations that are Black-led, that are minority ethnic-led, and support them to develop their projects in order that they can get funding and do what they do creatively. My talk today is going to address elements of that, but importantly, it really is a personal perspective in terms of some of the issues I think we have faced, and we recognise that we have faced them for some time. You know, indeed, for a very long time, many of us we've been seeking, we've been looking for, we've been working towards a change. The change that I have in mind, of course, is one of some significance, hence the reason that we've been looking at it for some time. So it will come as no surprise to you that the change I'm talking about is a change in the way Black and brown people in this country are treated. This change is a change that will mean that when we enter shops, store detectives, the shop owners will not look at us with suspicion. The change means that when we go out and looking for jobs, for homes, other opportunities, we will be assessed on our merits and not on our skin tone. The change is one that will address the overrepresentation of Black males in mental health institutions and in services. The change that will allow us to feel that our opinions, our presence, our contributions, and indeed our lives are not worth any less than any others in the country. A change that will prevent young Black men being incarcerated at a rate 4 times more than any other ethnic group in this country. And a change that ensures those who are in position of authority, law enforcement, justice departments, are held to account when their actions result in the denial of equal rights and justice. Now, responsibility for this change in society has traditionally been placed in the hands of those in authority, those we might describe as being the ruling class, our politicians, lawmakers, even the church. But I think we have known for some time, and it has become very clearly most recently, that the change that we seek will not happen far and fast enough if we leave it to those self-selected few. So in my view, the answer is pretty simple. We, and the we are those of us who want that change most must be that agent, those agents for change. If we are to rely on those others for that change, there is no doubt that our efforts and our aspirations will forever fall short. As the saying goes, we are the ones and the change that we have been waiting for. So I would ask you not to be put off by thoughts of what your contribution may or may not do or may not likely to achieve in terms of the difference. Any contribution will make a difference. The notion that you can't do anything is simply not true. Every conversation on the subject of inequality, every point you make, every time you intervene in public or in private, when you hear or see racist views or behaviour, you are adding to that body of opinion that will eventually see those attitudes tumble. Now, we are not likely to physically see this wall of inequality and injustice come down, but I think it's important to know that your support, your actions, your comments will constantly be chipping away at the foundations of inequality and injustice if you speak up. Regrettably, we have seen some resurgence of people with racist views, opinions, and ideology take center stage in the world we live in. Of course, these people have always been there and they will never, we have to be honest, they will never go away. We have, however, somehow allowed them to believe that their negative and the distorted views have a place in respectable discourse. That has to be challenged because it simply does not. And they need to be aware of that. So again, this is where we come in. You don't have to be anybody special. You don't have to do anything special. What we need to do is to realize that staying silent is no longer an option if we are to bring about those changes that we want to see. You can speak of change in any way that you want. It will be valid. It will be beneficial. So you may speak of it from a creative point of view, politically, socially, economically. Do so individually, do so collectively, but speak up. I have a quote here by an American writer called Rita Mae Brown. She wrote, "Cautious, careful people, always caring about their reputation and social standing, never can bring about reform. Those who are earnest must be willing to be everything and nothing in the world's estimation to bring about change." So I'm going to end by saying, I believe that we as individuals have the ability to bring about change. What I would do is ask that you understand, you do not underestimate that ability. In fact, can I ask you that you use that ability anytime you have the opportunity to, and most importantly, when you believe it is right. In those situations, don't second guess yourself. If you feel it in your gut, it is right to do or say something that challenges racism, inequality, or injustice, then it is right to do so. Do not wait for somebody else to say it or to intervene. Say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done. Final quote by Albert Swanster. He is a French theologian, philosopher, and musician. And he wrote, "Civilization can only revive when there shall come into being a number of individuals with a new tone of mind. This tone of mind will be independent of the prevalent one amongst the crowds, and it will be in opposition to it. It will be a tone of mind which will gradually win influence over the current one, and in the end, determine its character. Only an ethical movement can rescue us from barbarism, and the ethical comes into existence only in individuals." Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is my video on? Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Before I start, I just want to thank the other panel. I think, it was spoken about one of the issues of the BAME acronym is that Black people's experiences are grouped together with the experiences of other people of colour, and that's just simply not true. So I just want to recognise that as a brown person, and quite frankly as a light-skinned brown person, that it's my role to be a good ally just as much as it is for all white people to be good allies. And I guess, again, like as a brown person, I'm very aware that this week has not only been especially exhausting and triggering for Black people, but that also you have disproportionately shouldered the burden of educating non-Black people. So I just want to send kind of solidarity and love and a huge thank you to all of the panelists. It's been such an insightful webinar, and thank you so much, Angela, for organising. So I'm going to talk a little bit about specifically in this time, what I think will be most useful is talking about the protests happening, the Black Lives Matter protests, and what rights people have, because I'm going to assume that a lot of people here either have protested this weekend that's just gone, or thinking about it, and I think it's a really difficult time to know what to do in a protest. So I thought I was going to talk a little bit about that, and as part of that I'm going to talk a little bit about police powers, because I think knowing your rights and being able to educate other people on their rights is something that I think can be really powerful in being a good ally. So I'm going to talk a bit about, firstly, the coronavirus regulations that have come in that currently ban gatherings of 6 or more people. And what we found on the weekend, so before I continue, I just want to say that I'm here not only in my capacity as Liberty, but I'm also one of the coordinators of the Black Protest Legal Support Group UK, which was set up by Ife Thompson. And it's a group led by Black and brown lawyers who've been doing lots of legal observing this weekend, and we were set up specifically to monitor and observe the behaviour of the police at the BLM protests this last weekend. So protesting is something that under the law, currently under the regulations, is technically not allowed. The coronavirus regulations have not provided an exception to go and protest. But the reality is that people protested this weekend, and they're continuing to protest every day. And the police so far haven't stopped people from protesting just because of coronavirus. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. So if you are out this weekend or this week protesting, and a police officer comes up to you and says, you're gathering in a group of more than 6 people, the first thing that you can do is tell them that you're not. If you've gone to protest with 1 or 2 people, a friend or a family member, you can tell them that. You can say, no, I'm in a group of less than 6. This is my wife, this is my sister, etc. But the police can ask you to go home, and they should give you the chance to go home voluntarily. But if they don't, you could be committing an offence. So what I would say is, if you do go to protests, and this is for everybody that attends a protest, whether you're a Black person or whether you're an ally, there is no point, I think, creating disruption in a really important protest by arguing with the police over this specific point of law. So I think if you're told to go home, be a good ally and go home, and don't make more more issues, I guess, for the police to bring. So that's coronavirus. I think knowing your rights is important. So the police have 3 things that they could potentially do that you can interact with at a protest. The first is called stop and account. So the police have the power to go up to anybody on the street and just ask, you know, who you are, ask your name, what are you doing, haven't seen you before around here. And you should know that you don't have to answer those questions. You can walk away, you can say no comment, you can just completely ignore them if you like, and you can walk away. And it can be very intimidating to walk away from a police officer who's asking you that, but if they just come up to you and ask you what you're doing or ask you just general questions, you can walk away. The next power that we, you know, that the police often use, and disproportionately against Black and brown people, but specifically Black people and specifically young Black men, is stop and search. So under normal circumstances, the police can only stop and search you if they suspect that you're carrying something that could be used to commit a crime. So for example, some drugs or some kind of weapon. If you're stopped and searched, the police must provide you with their name and their police station. They must tell you what they're expecting to find. So the police can't just go searching through your pockets without telling you, you know, without telling you what they want to find there. They should tell you why they're searching you, and they should make a record. And you're entitled to that record. And you can ask, you've got 3 months after a stop and search to ask the police to give a record of that stop and search. So that's what can happen during stop and search. And again, as I mentioned, the difference between stop and search and stop and account is that during a stop and search, the police officer has to tell you what power they're doing that under. Whereas stop and account, if a police officer just comes up to you and just starts asking you general questions without saying why or what power they're doing that under, you don't have to answer those ones. The final one is arrest, and I'm conscious that we've got the time limited, so I'm going to just be really quick on that one. If you're arrested at a protest, you are entitled to a few things. You're entitled to legal advice. You're entitled to have someone informed of your arrest, so a friend or a family member, and you're entitled to an interpreter if English is not your first language, and you're entitled to an appropriate adult if you're under 18 or if you are vulnerable, so you've got a mental health condition or a disability or, you know, something that makes you vulnerable. You're entitled to have a friend or family member present with you during interviews, you know, during the process at the police station. And I'm going to go on to why, talking about allyship and why this is really important. But if you are arrested this weekend, you should say nothing to the police. You should say no comment to any and all questions, and that's whether it's a formal interview or whether, you know, it's a friendly chat in the car on the way to the station, until you get advice from a solicitor. And the reason why is because you are allowed to get advice from a solicitor, and that's really important, and you should follow solicitor's advice before saying anything to the police. If you are protesting this weekend, look out for legal observers. Legal observers usually wearing a high-vis jacket which has legal observer written on them, and they're usually handing out bus cards that look something like this. They have rights on them, and they also have your different solicitors that you can potentially contact. So there are solicitors that specialize in protest law, and if you are arrested, they're the best ones to contact. There are duty solicitors at the police station, but duty solicitors often don't have the special knowledge about what happens at a protest to advise you in the best way. So that was a very quick rundown through a lot of law, so I apologize if that was a little overwhelming. I'm very happy to send out some resources on that, and I've got some websites I can send out, but I'll talk about now being a good ally at protests based on that. So I think Freida made this really important point. Get to the back if you're a not Black person at a Black Lives Matter protest. I often see at protests and rallies generally white people at the front. And please remember that you're there as an ally. So you shouldn't be the loudest voice in the crowd. You're there for solidarity primarily. So don't be at the front where, you know, Black people, and especially young Black people that have been protesting this weekend, sometimes for the first time, you know, deserve to be at the front of that protest, because the protest is about them. It's about their lives and their experiences. So thanks, Freida, a lot for that. Secondly, be vigilant. So what I experienced this weekend is that the police, unsurprisingly, treated Black and brown people with disproportionate power that they did with white people. And we really saw that with my team of legal observers. So we've got legal observers who were there. The coordinators, as I said, are all black and brown, but we also have white legal observers. And the police treated the black and brown legal observers completely differently to the way they treated the white legal observers. So if you're a white person at a protest this weekend, be vigilant, watch around you. If you see a black or brown person be treated with hostility by the police, or being arrested or being spoken to, you can go up to them, you can see, you can support them, and that's why I said it's really important to be equipped with your rights. And as I mentioned, I will share the pages that have the summary of law and also have some more practical advice. You can go up to them and you can say to them, are you okay? Do you need any help? The police might not take kindly to you, and that's why you should just focus on the person that you think you want to support. That there is an offence of obstructing the police officers, which you don't want to do. You don't want to be committing an offence. So if the police, I would say firstly, don't get in the police's way if you do that. But if the police say you're obstructing, just take a step back. Say, I'm not obstructing, I'm really sorry, I'm not getting in the way, I'm just offering support to this person. And you can do things like take notes about what's happening to them, take down their number, and just be mindful of supporting them. Another thing is to be aware of kids at protests. So this weekend we saw a lot of young people, teenagers protesting, and that's amazing because they deserve to be an active part of these protests, and these really impact them, and it's great to see so many young people being so engaged politically. But again, they're more vulnerable, so just be aware of the teenagers around you. And again, if you see a young person who looks like they're getting treated in a certain way by the police, offer support, offer to call a friend or family member for them. Again, be careful about not distracting the police. And the final thing I wanted to say is about videos. So we see now, obviously in the age of social media, I've just got a question, how about filming? Thank you. You are allowed to video and film and take photographs of the police. That's something that everyone is allowed to do. The only time that you're not allowed to do it is if the police suspect you of doing it for terrorism. But the Metropolitan Police's guidance is that the police should not stop you from filming them at a kind of normal protest, and it's very unlikely that you'd just be filming someone at a normal protest for the purposes of terrorism. But if the police tell you that they think you're filming for the purposes of terrorism, you would have to stop. But I think that's unlikely. What I would say on videoing though is please don't share it on social media. And the reason why is because if a video is shared on social media, a lot of people see it, it might mean that is not then allowed to be used as evidence in any kind of criminal trial. So for example, if or in a civil trial where someone is trying to sue the police. So for example, if someone's going through a criminal trial and there's a video of a police unlawfully arresting them, but that video has been shared around social media, it might not be able to be used as evidence in court. So that's a key piece of evidence to that person to be acquitted that they then can't use. So don't share it. What you can do is, if you do manage to get someone's number or their details, you can send it to them, but don't share it in public. So I'm going to, I think, finish up there. I know I just gave a lot of information and some of it was quite dense, so I'm really happy to send some websites and answer questions. And I hope that was useful. And I think just the main takeaway is, if you're going to protest this weekend, just be aware of your rights. And if you can educate other people around you of your rights, that is sometimes the best thing that you can do for people who are protesting, who are vulnerable especially. So yeah, I'm going to finish up there. Yeah, I guess just really quickly, I would say, if the police are going to start asking you anything or start doing anything, the thing that you can say is, under what power are you asking this of me? And then they will have to tell you the power, or they'll have to quote the statute or the case law, and you can write that down. And usually then when you say under what power to the police, if they are trying to be cheeky and asking you something that they're not actually allowed to do, that's usually when they back down. So I guess that's probably the most important phrase to remember, as well as no comment when you don't actually have to ask anything.
Thank you, Monique. All of you guys, thank you. Round of applause to everyone, to all of our speakers and to the attendees. You've been great. And I don't know how, oh, I can see people whooping. I can't hear them, but I can see it. So great, let's do more of these. I will